claim that I got my morality from a religious tradition. Ask yourself, when you pick up the Bible or the Hebrew Bible or any holy book and find ethical wisdom in there, what is that process like? I mean, you pick up Leviticus or Deuteronomy, and you find that if a woman is not a virgin on her wedding night, you're supposed to stone her to death on her father's doorstep. Okay, presumably you choose to reject that pearl of ancient wisdom. And then you find another line, I think this is also in Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. Or the golden rule, as preached in the New Testament. And this resonates with you as a good operating premise to generate further moral intuitions. If nothing else, it's a good ideal to live toward. Now, that process, the guarantor of your morality in that case is not the book. It's in your brain. And this kind of truth testing is something that we bring to religion. Now, religion does a lot of work on people, and you can get good people to believe some very terrible things in the name of God, and this is what worries me about religion. And I think we waste time talking about Stalin and Hitler and Pol Pot, frankly, because these were political religions. These were dogmatisms through and through, and when anyone started to make too much sense in opposition to these dogmatisms, they were carted off for religious fanaticism. I would say two things, and I suspect the second will be the basis of another conversation here. The first is that it is, let's say, I don't know that I like the word moderates, but it is healthy religion that provides the only hope for sick religion to be well. I don't think that there is any chance that the preaching of irreligion will in fact persuade those who are fanatic to change their ways, but I think those who know how to speak the same language have some chance of doing that. The second point that I would make is that when you talk about the needless suffering that religion has caused, I think that it's time maybe to address the historical record, because I think that religion's record is nothing less than exemplary compared to irreligion. And so I would say that if you're going to try in this world to make a decent world, that historically speaking, although I won't speak for the future, you're much better off training people. I think the one thing to notice is that the dialogue between science and religion has gone this way. It has been one of relentless and one-directional erosion of religious authority. I would challenge anyone here to think of a question upon which we once had a scientific answer, however inadequate, but for which now the best answer is a religious one. Now you can think of an uncountable number of questions that run the other way, where we once had a religious answer, and now the authority of religion has been battered and nullified by science and by moral progress and secular progress generally. And I think that's not an accident. And the one area where religion still seems to hold its ground is now under assault by science, and it's very good that it is under assault by science. And this is the whole issue of morality and human happiness and what constitutes the good life. These are, and let me just tell you why I think this is a scientific question. Even the place of science is ultimately a scientific question. Because surely there are objective facts to be learned about the basis of human happiness. The moment you recognize that morality and spirituality and value is a matter of happiness and suffering, and that we're moving suffering in the direction of happiness, then you realize that if there are objective facts to know about human happiness, and surely there are facts about the way that genes and ideas and uses of attention and economic systems, social structures, all of these conspire to make us happy or miserable. And again, it's true that scientific discourse is just in the beginning of addressing these issues. But It's not too soon to say that love is better than hate in terms of ethics. And we are studying these things at the level of the brain. Eventually we will understand the brain basis of love and hate and the kinds of mechanisms, both cultural and personal, that ramify these states of mind. And there will be right and wrong answers. And we'll find, for instance, that honor killing is a bad strategy if you want to raise compassionate men. We know that already, but at some point we will know this biochemically.
What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, I can think of a couple of examples, although I don't think that that's crucial. But for example, Marxism, which was the scientific study of societies and was thought of as a science.
Nobody thinks that's science.
Nobody thinks it is now. You said an answer now that people once thought was scientific but no longer do. That's a good example.
Oh, no,
but let me just
clarify my question.
But a religious answer to life is much better now than this poor science that was Marxism, or for that matter, I would say, than the not very good science that was Freudianism. But go ahead.
Well, I agree on both counts. It's just that the point to make is that the antidote to bad science or failed science or scientific incompleteness is good science and more science. It's not religion.
By the way, I want to preempt that answer for religion. That's exactly the answer to bad religion or poor religion or failed religion is more religion, instead of saying that religion ought to be banished because, for example, people think mistakenly that good religion is flying planes into buildings. But I also think that the way that you set it up at the beginning is not the way that it used to be or that it has to be. That is, science and religion weren't classically in opposition, except in certain specific instances. And even those instances are much more complicated than we suspect. You know, Galileo and Pope Urban were friends. And there is a friendship issue as well as a lot of political issues that were involved in Galileo's eventual recantation. It wasn't just there was faith over here and there was Galileo over there, when in fact there were people in the church who agreed with Galileo. And Newton was a devout Christian, as you may know. And the relation between science and religion wasn't classically just oppositional. It was sometimes oppositional, but more often synergistic. And people believed that they coexisted as they should. But you can't answer the question of what's a good life scientifically. You can't.
Why not?
I can say what will make you feel a certain way. But whether that's good, let me give you an example. You talked about happiness. There are some people who've lived very unhappy lives that religiously you would evaluate as very good lives. I mean, Rabbi Akiva at the end of his life was not happy. Right? I mean, he was martyred. But if you were to bring Rabbi Akiva back to life and say, would you say that the end of your life was good or bad? He would say, I have no doubt, painful but good. And if you said to him, but what about scientifically? He would say, well, scientifically I was being burned alive. But you can't evaluate my life scientifically. And in fact, I just want to give one little sermonic coda here. Anybody, just one. Yeah. Just one for the moment. Okay. How could you know me so quickly? Anybody who has children or who believes that they're doing something important in this world, or who works in difficult circumstances to bring water to villages or food to hungry people, would say that
Sam Harris argues that morality and happiness are scientific questions, not religious ones, and the data supports his view. Studies in neuroscience and psychology show that happiness is more about factors like relationships, health, and financial stability than religious practice. For instance, the Harvard study of adult development, which has followed people for over 80 years, found that social connections and mental health are the strongest predictors of happiness, not religious beliefs. Harris also points out that moral codes existed before most religions, proving that ethics don't rely on divine command. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for example, was created without religious input, yet it upholds universal human dignity and freedoms. Rabbi David Wolpe counters this by emphasizing that certain aspects of human life, including suffering and sacrifice, cannot be fully understood without a spiritual lens. However, while Wolpe's view stresses the importance of religion in guiding moral life, Harris insists that we can build a better understanding of well-being using science. The real question is, are we ready to let go of outdated religious frameworks and embrace a more evidence-based approach to morality and happiness?
I think that it's certainly in our society and in Europe, it's not taboo to preach atheism. More books are poured forth every day. But here's the question. I do want you to look actually at the historical record. Let's just take the Western monotheistic faiths, okay? Before they existed, think about the world. I forget the pre-state world, where cultural anthropologists tell us that about 1 in every 4 men died of violent death. And then you had pre-monotheistic regimes like Assyria, Babylonia, which were savage beyond the imagination of anything you will find in the Bible or anywhere else. And then, all of a sudden, when it became possible for there to be a regime without a religion, and you know when that became possible, right? That became possible in the French Revolution. That was when it first became possible to not have a religion. Now, is it just an extraordinary coincidence that genocide started to enter the modern world, first with the bloodbath that followed the French Revolution, then with the Napoleonic Wars, that the worst war that ever happened in this country, the Civil War, was not a religious war, that when you had regimes, whatever you want to call them, that explicitly rejected religion, you had Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, I mean, I could go on and on and on. It just seems to me an extraordinary coincidence, far beyond the possibility of believing, to say that, no, what was wrong with all these regimes is that they didn't think like Sam Harris. Because it's true, they didn't think like Sam Harris. But the values that you take with skeptical inquiry are values that, in fact, were taken from the religious regimes that you find unpalatable and that were rejected by all these regimes that were genocidal, including, of course, the worst from the point of view of any single country, which was Hitler, Mao, and Stalin.
Okay, there are a few claims there that we have to shelve. One is this idea that you just claim that I got my morality from a religious tradition. Ask yourself, when you pick up the Bible or the Hebrew Bible or any holy book and find ethical wisdom in there, what is that process like? I mean, you pick up Leviticus or Deuteronomy, and you find that if a woman is not a virgin on her wedding night, you're supposed to stone her to death on her father's doorstep. Okay, presumably you choose to reject that pearl of ancient wisdom. And then you find another line, I think this is also in Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. Or the golden rule, as preached in the New Testament. And this resonates with you as a good operating premise to generate further moral intuitions. If nothing else, it's a good ideal to live toward. Now, that process, the guarantor of your morality in that case is not the book. It's in your brain. And this kind of truth testing is something that we bring to religion. Now, religion does a lot of work on people, and you can get good people to believe some very terrible things in the name of God, and this is what worries me about religion. And I think we waste time talking about Stalin and Hitler and Pol Pot, frankly, because these were political religions. These were dogmatisms through and through, and when anyone started to make too much sense in opposition to these dogmatisms, they were carted off and killed. These were not contexts in which rational discourse prevailed and the best idea won. So to call them science is just to misuse the term. And it's, in the case of Hitler, it's just a total non sequitur because Hitler never really repudiated Jesus, and he used Jesus in his speech, and he was facilitated by 1,000 years of religious fulminating against the Jews in the name of Christianity. Religion is implicated, certainly, in the Holocaust. So it's not, I think, a conversation worth having.
I'm sorry, I brought a quote. This is from Viktor Frankl, who is a survivor and a therapist. This book, The Doctor and the Soul. The gas chambers of Auschwitz were the ultimate consequence of a theory that man is nothing but the product of heredity and environment, or as the Nazis like to say, of blood and soil. I'm absolutely convinced that the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Majdanek were ultimately prepared not in some ministry or other in Berlin, but rather at the desks and in lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers.
Okay, well that is an opinion that I think we can all reject on its face.
Really?
Clearly. Do you really think you think Auschwitz
Yes,
is the result
absolutely.
of
I
thinking
think
too
that the
clearly about the
rejection,
physical world?
yes, the rejection of transcendence and the idea that human beings are all heredity and environment and breeding and eugenics and social Darwinism was absolutely a much greater contributor than the
hatred of Jews?
Than the rejected Christianity. Well, it wasn't just the destruction of the Jewish people. It was, don't forget, World War II, right? This was much wider than the hatred of one people. But yes, why was it focused on the Jews? In part because the explanation that Hitler gave wasn't theological. The explanation that he gave was racial. Had it been theological, I would say yes, theological. But strikingly,
But weren't the
all
roots
these
theological?
The history of anti-Semitism.
there was a long history of anti-Semitism, but why did it never explode into genocide in a Christian government?
It was, first of all, the history of the Jews in Europe is a history punctuated by rather ceaselessly by
No
pogroms
question.
and murder that was explicitly religious. I mean, you have something like host desecration.
Yes.
I don't know if you know about this phenomenon that I came across while researching my first book. The communion host is thought to be, once blessed, is thought to actually physically be the body of Jesus. And therefore, if it's mistreated, this is, you can literally, in torturing a cracker, you are torturing the body of Jesus. There are accounts of whole villages purged of Jews who were accused of having mistreated crackers. So the question is, does the belief in the transubstantiation, which is a belief that I would have thought could be rather harmless, have anything to do with the idea that someone can mistreat a cracker and that you should kill him for it? Yes, it does have something to do. It's impossible to believe in the torture of crackers unless you think transubstantiation is a fact.
But what it's not impossible to believe in is the torture of one group by another. And that is, as you know, virtually universal in human history.
And it's given immense energy by religious hatred.
The question arises, in what sort of regime are you likely to be able to get a society a la America where that is minimized? And it seems to me quite clear that if you look through history, although the depredations of religion, we could spend all night talking about the terrible things that have happened in the name of religion. But that would have much more power if you took essentially good people and made them rotten, as opposed to taking people who are predisposed to both good and evil actions and given them distinct identities one from the other. Nation states, religions, neighborhoods, so on. And what you get almost inevitably is the action of one group against the other. And in fact, the only transcendent idea that I can think of that really does tie one person to another is God, which is why when you actually filter that book through a person, as opposed to, say, just opening Deuteronomy, which no tradition that I know of suggests is a way to learn morality, but when you filter it through a person, you get someone like Isaiah who criticizes Jews on the basis of the Bible that he knows far better than we, or Hillel who, when he's asked to summarize an entire tradition, knowing it intimately and intricately, doesn't say, go persecute someone. He says, what's hateful to you, don't do to someone else. Because even though you can cherry pick lines that are both funny and destructive, the truth is that every tradition is not made just of propositions. It's something that's lived and is bred in you, and if it works well, produces magnificent human beings.
Yeah, and the problem is there are many gods and books on offer.
Yes.
And they make incompatible claims about
Yes.
how we should live in this world.
That's
Again, the hope, I mean, you're proffering a hope for humanity, which is the right religion most of the time. I don't know how this is going to interact well with the spread of destructive technology. I don't know how we're going to get to a future where Muslims believing in martyrdom and Christians believing in the rapture will be a good recipe for good neighbors. I think that is a kind of a reductio ad absurdum of this more religion argument. Again, I reject the analogy to the most repressive totalitarianisms of the 21st century. I'm simply arguing that we need to cease to reward people for pretending to know things they do not know. And the only area of discourse where we do this is
Sam Harris shares the idea that morality and happiness can be explored through human experience and scientific understanding. Rather than relying only on tradition or authority, he turns to observation, reflection, and data. The Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest-running studies of its kind, has followed participants for more than 80 years. The research points to consistent patterns. Strong personal relationships, emotional well-being, and life stability are closely tied to long-term fulfillment. People have long turned to religion and philosophy to navigate life's biggest questions. Religious traditions have shaped laws, customs, and community values. These traditions carry teachings that many find meaningful. At the same time, history also shows moments when those same teachings were used to justify exclusion or inequality. These are all part of the broader human story, filled with complexity, struggle, and learning. Rabbi David Wolpe reflects on how spiritual life can offer a way to understand pain, purpose, and connection. He speaks to how stories and rituals help people stay grounded and compassionate. Sam Harris offers another lens, focusing on how people can build ethical understanding through shared experience, reasoned discussion, and careful attention to the outcomes of actions. Ideas such as fairness, dignity, and consent have developed over time. Philosophers like Spinoza, Hume, and others contributed to ongoing conversations about how people live together and make choices. These ideas didn't emerge overnight. They grew through debates, writings, protests, and lived experience. People from many walks of life, activists, teachers, neighbors, have helped shape the ethical frameworks that guide communities today. Moral reflection often happens through conversation. Disagreements, questions, and even uncertainty play a part in how individuals grow. Over time, people revise their values, respond to new challenges, and adapt to changes around them. This process doesn't require a single path. It allows for many voices, many stories, and many ways of seeking clarity. The discussion between Harris and Wolpe invites an open question. How do people come to understand right and wrong? Is it something passed down? Something discovered? Something created in response to real life? These aren't questions with final answers, but they're worth asking. They lead to reflection on how values are shaped not just by belief, but by participation, relationship, and lived responsibility. Rather than placing morality within one fixed structure, this view encourages exploration. It makes space for curiosity and conversation. It recognizes that people, through reflection, care, and connection, continue to shape the world around them. And in that ongoing work, there's room for growth, honesty, and a shared effort to live thoughtfully with one another.
Invisible order that gives them a life of a certain sanctity and holiness.
This is a general claim.
You're
Religious
asking-
human beings
I mean,
generally live in harmony with...
No, I said my experience of certain human beings. I mean, I can keep going if you want me to keep going.
Well, no, I think you've put enough on the table.
Okay, but none of those are scientific evidence.
Many of those claims trespass upon the territory of science overtly. I mean, the claim about your understanding other human beings being suggestive of a divine artificer.
Is that a scientific claim?
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
I mean, is your understanding of mathematics also suggestive of a divine artificer?
No, it has to do with my experience.
Your ability to learn language?
Do you understand? It has to do with my experience of you. When I'm looking at you right now,
Right.
you may assume that what I see is a material, but that's not what I see. And it's not what I believe. And I think that
I
there's
understand
something,
it's not what you
there's
believe, but
something in you that is more than you believe. I really think so.
This is
Now, if you want to make that a scientific claim, you can. But I'm telling you, it's a metaphysical claim, and to confuse the two is a mistake.
Okay, you can add any metaphysics you want.
Thank you.
In that, by that means. I mean, I can say, I see you as a reincarnate personality, and I think you were probably
I was someone famous.
on Atlantis. Yes.
Right. Don't make me like a washerwoman in a previous
People do this all the time. I mean, you can broadcast. I mean, this is constrained by our common sense in every other domain of discourse. I mean, just take, for example, the people who think Elvis is still alive. Okay, what's wrong with this claim? I mean, why is this claim not vitiating our academic departments and corporations? I mean, I'll tell you why, and it's very simple. We have not passed laws against believing Elvis is still alive. The problem is that whenever somebody seriously represents his belief that Elvis is still alive, in a conversation, on a first date, at a lecture, at a job interview, he immediately pays a price.
Yeah.
He pays a price in ill-concealed laughter.
Right. Now, surely you can agree with him on that.
That is a good thing. Now, then he could rattle on about this is not a scientific claim. This is a matter of faith. You know, when I look at you, I see you might be Elvis. I mean, he could do this.
Except that, you know, this is like I mean, almost all the books. I don't believe it's in your book, to your credit, but the Bertrand Russell teapot analogy, right, which Dawkins is so fond of, that there might be a celestial teapot circling the globe.
I think it's in my book too.
Is it? Shame on you. If you make a claim about the existence of a physical entity like Elvis or a teapot, yes, that is evaluated the way you evaluate any other physical entity. That's why I keep saying, and I will say it again, that it is not a scientific claim to say that I believe you have a soul or that God exists. If it were a scientific claim, then you would be able to evaluate it the same way you could get a telescope and look for a teapot, but you can't.
Let me ask a question that deals with, change gears on you guys here.
Yeah.
Question that deals with human creativity. Okay. Religion has inspired a lot of great works. Look at the world of music, the visual arts. Okay, let's just for a second say the world comes over to your way of thinking.
Right.
How does that affect the arts? Music, literature, The Simpsons. You know, I'm just curious. What would that creative world be without that?
I think it's a false fear. The idea that we wouldn't find any reason to build beautiful architecture or paint nice paintings, but for indulging certain religious superstitions. It's just not. I think Feynman once wrote that it was a poor poet who must fall silent when he finds out that the sun is actually a massive sphere of hydrogen fusing into helium. I mean, it's not. The claim is that you have to take something on faith to be creative, and I think it's a product of an argument that you used briefly early on, which is a fallacious one. This idea that the percentages of people who do these great, I think you used it in the connection
in terms of goodness, not in terms of art.
Yeah, in terms of goodness.
Right.
Most people.
Was it not fallacious in goodness?
Yeah.
I'm just
well, yeah,
curious.
no, it's
that
fallacious.
one too. Okay.
Most people are doing this good work are doing it for religious reasons. Well, most people, most of the time, have been religious throughout human history. There has been no one else to do the job. This is true.
Yeah.
I mean, most people who have plucked chickens have plucked them while believing in God. That does not mean you need to believe in God to pluck a chicken.
That is precisely why. That is precisely why it's important to look at the 20th century and the 19th century, when it was possible to have societies that didn't believe in God, and to see what happened.
But you have
and
to
when
look
I
at what
did
else
that,
they
you said,
believed in.
when I did that, you said, but they didn't believe what I believe. And what I'm saying is that if you
very
had
few
a...
people do believe what you believe. Apparently.
No, I being Sam Harris here, not what I, David Wolpe, believe.
well,
You said, when I said Napoleon, the French Terror, the Civil War, Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, all these, as soon as it became possible to have non-religious regimes, look what happened to the world. You said, but what about people who believe what I do? And what I'm saying to you is that thus far in the world, extraordinarily enough, when you remove religion from a society, it is not ruled by Sam Harris's. That's not the way it seems to work. Now, you'll tell me this is a utilitarian argument, and indeed it is. This doesn't prove that religion is true, but it certainly does prove that there is a values vacuum in societies when you suck religion out of it or force it out that is, to my way of thinking, terrifying.
It does not prove that simply because you have to look at what else these people believe. There is a values vacuum in religion. There's a values vacuum in an organization like the Catholic Church that preaches the sinfulness of condom use in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes, I agree with you.
Okay, there's a values vacuum in that same institution that shelters its pedophile priests.
Yeah.
Literally an army of child rapists,
Yes.
based on its own intent upon maintaining its integrity as a religious institution. There's a values vacuum and I could go on. And it's not like religion is this perfect advertisement for the kinds of values you get once you believe that your book was dictated by the greater universe.
It is an imperfect institution that is adopted by imperfect people in an imperfect world. And if you expect that it's going to be perfect, then you will be consistently disappointed. And that's why every religion that I know of emphasizes the fact that goodness is a continual and often failed struggle. And
as does science.
One would expect that science doesn't emphasize that goodness is a continual but failed struggle, right? Certain scientists may, but science as a whole doesn't say anything about the metaphysical nature of human goodness. And by the way, Richard Feynman said explicitly that science and religion ought to be able to coexist. So I'm glad that you quoted him, because that lets me get that little appercue in.
I'm going to step in here now. I'm getting the signal over there that, do we have the microphone available for questions? Where's Gadi? Do we have someone on this side who has a question? Yes, please.
Rabbi Wolpe, at the beginning of this discussion, Sam Harris talked about the Bible and how human sacrifice is pervasive in the Bible, and how the ancient Hebrews practiced it, but you didn't respond to that.
No.
And I wonder what your response would be.
Sure. I didn't say that it was pervasive. Don't want to. The answer is that human sacrifice was pervasive around the civilization of the Bible. And in fact, Gehenna, which is the Hebrew word for hell, is based on the fact that in the valley outside Jerusalem, that's where the pagan peoples around the Israelites did sacrifice children, which gives you some sense of the meaning of sacrificing children in Hebrew tradition. Yiftach was the only one who actually sacrificed a child and is condemned by it all through Jewish literature. Abraham, the point of the Abraham story, according to many commentators, which I take to be, is precisely to say that although the gods of the world up to that time do demand human sacrifice, God doesn't, which is why, as the psychologist Eric Wellish says, the key phrase in that story is, don't raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. Right? That's what the angel says to Abraham when Abraham raises the knife. And that's the key message. So to say that either the Hebrew people, the Israelite people, or the Bible advocates human sacrifice, and I'm not putting that in your mouth, but to suggest that is it's just a travesty of the Bible.
Well, I'd add a few codas there. The picture is not quite that rosy. First of all, the Abraham story does not end with any resolute condemnation of human sacrifice. There are a few lines where God condemns human sacrifice in Deuteronomy and elsewhere. There are a few moments where he...
Sam Harris throws a bold question on the table. Do moral values really come from religion, or are we just used to thinking they do? Take the story of Abraham and Isaac. Abraham nearly goes through with sacrificing his own son because he believes it's what he's been asked to do. The story often gets told as a lesson in faith, but Harris points out something a little unsettling. Nowhere does it say, this was a bad idea. Instead, Abraham gets praised for being ready to do it. That raises a bigger question. What exactly are we supposed to learn here? Then the topic takes a turn toward creativity. Rabbi David Wolpe talks about how religion has inspired centuries of music, art, and beauty. No one's denying that. But Harris gently points out that creativity has roots in all sorts of places. Curiosity, openness, and imagination can spark in anyone, scientist, artist, believer, or not. He brings up people like Einstein and Feynman, whose work changed the world, not because of religious inspiration, but because they kept asking the right questions. Then the topic shifts to history's darker chapters. Wolpe mentions regimes that rejected religious institutions and caused enormous harm. Harris agrees the harm is real, but points out those regimes weren't built on freedom of thought. They ran on dogma, control, and fear, just wearing a different uniform. At the heart of it, Harris isn't trying to erase religion. He's asking, what really helps us become better to each other? What kind of stories push us to care, grow, and build fairer communities? Maybe morality isn't something handed down once and for all. Maybe it's something people keep working on, through conversation, struggle, and a bit of soul-searching. Not perfect, but always in progress. What's your perspective on this? Do you believe religion is key to moral values, or can we build ethics and compassion independently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this got you ideas, be sure to like, subscribe, and share to keep the conversation going.